The topic today is a suggested topic from somebody who has been listening to the podcast. And the question is, how do I discipline my kids? And I think this is such a great question. I actually want to narrow it down a little bit more into what I think is really being asked, and that is, how do I get my kids to do what I want them to do? And when I think about, what approach you could take as a parent, I kind of see, we could divide it up into three categories. The first category is rewards. You could say what you want your kid to do and offer them some sort of, carrot, reward for doing what you've asked them to do. Positive reinforcement, that's sort of a reward. The second option is a punishment. So if you don't do what I want you to do, here is the consequence that I'm going to impose on you. And the third option is taking a more collaborative approach, power with approach. And this is really the one that I get excited about and promote and share with parents. And I want to take a little bit of time right now to explore each of these three options, knowing full well that as parents, we might dip into all three from time to time. It's not necessarily true that we have one approach and we stick with that all the time. In reality, I think that we dabble in all three, but I'm going to try to share why I like to dabble more and lean into collaborative approaches more often. All right, let's start with the first option that I mentioned, and that is rewards. So with rewards, it's an external motivation. So it's not internal. They're being externally motivated to do something that maybe they'd be internally motivated to do, who knows? But with that external motivation, they're sort of robbed of that chance of checking in with themselves to see if they naturally would be interested in being in alignment with the request, or I guess it's not even a request, to be in alignment with what you want to do. With this form of rewards, this form of externally motivating a child to do something, it could include things like praise. Some kids are really interested in receiving praise, especially the more kids are, actually this is my next point, the more often human beings are externally motivated, it's almost like we become driven by external motivation. And if you've ever encountered a child who has received a lot of praise, they actually sort of become more hungry for it. It's almost like they're looking outside themselves for validation. They're looking outside themselves. Is this right? Is this okay? Did I do a good job? So praise is certainly something that would fall under the reward category. A lot of people would call this, positive reinforcement. And again, it's a judgment put on the child. So it's an external motivator for the child, not internal. A lot of families like doing, star charts. So if the kid does these things that the parent wants them to do, they get a little star on the chart. And then at the end of the week, or when they get a certain number of stars, then they're rewarded with a treat or a privilege. So star charts would certainly fall under external motivation, this reward style of getting your child to do what you want them to do. Some people don't even bother with the star charts. They just flat out share what the reward would be. Maybe if you do this, you'll get 5 extra minutes to play on your tablet. So anytime there is something that you want to happen and you attach a treat or a reward to that, first of all, you make that treat or reward more of a scarce commodity. You kind of skew the meaning of that treat or privilege. But again, it's an external factor that's motivating them to do something. Now, one of the tricky parts about any form of external motivation is that there is this depreciating value. So the more often someone receives a reward or something positive, they're actually, you need to up the ante. So if you are requesting something and now they want to know, what am I going to get out of it? And they're sort of making that calculation in their head sometimes, is this worth it to me? So you might find that if you're using rewards a lot, the rewards keep increasing in value. And some parents really struggle with that, I'm in this cycle of doing rewards and motivation by rewards, and it's not really working for me right now because I see the escalation of rewards happening. Another thing that happens usually simultaneously is that as the child gets older, so as they start to experience more power related to their age, these rewards don't have the same value for them because they might have more resources to meet their own needs. So if you're only using this reward strategy, that kind of like big kid, tween, definitely by teens, it's not working the same. So I think it's really helpful to have other strategies in place because eventually your kid's probably going to grow out of this being a strategy that works for you to get your needs met. One last point on this strategy is that, how to describe this? So I really value connection. I think it's really important if we want to be living in a world where the majority of us feel like our needs are getting met and we're working towards sharing this planet together in all of our diversity. Connection's really important. And although it might seem like this strategy uses or has elements of connection, it's kind of skewed. And I'll explain that. So with an externally motivated system, the parent or the person with power is paying attention to what the child values and offering that as the carrot. So there is some connection. They are recognizing what the child values, and they're attaching it to the parent's need being fulfilled. Now, the child, their connection is skewed because they are paying a lot of attention to the person in power, the parent, and what their needs are, and have less connection to their needs. They'll probably still have some connection to their needs, but it's less. And they're probably not going to voice it as often to the parent because the dynamic is set up so that the parent's needs are related to receiving these rewards. So it's almost like a scarce commodity kind of system, right? And in this scarce commodity, yes, there's connection, but we can actually get deeper, more meaningful relationships with our kids if we branch out and do a more collaborative approach. So I think I've covered all my points now on this externally motivated system of using rewards. Now let's switch over and let's look a little bit at another external motivator, and that's using punishments. So with punishments, again, there's so much overlap with the rewards because they're both related to externally motivating a child. And, the parent is the one with the power and the child is the one with less power. So with this motivation technique, again, you can use words. So just like with a positive or reward system, it's still judgment happening. but it's negative judgment. So words can still be used. Judgments can still be conveyed using words, and that can have the same effect as a punishment. So it doesn't even necessarily have to be being called a name or something like that. Just some sort of words that feel punishing to the child have that effect of getting them to do what the parents want them to do. So, some parents or some kids, as they grow up, they might share, my mom or my dad might just look at me. They'd give me a look, and I knew that I was in trouble. Another use of words as a punishment might be, if you don't stop this right now, I'm going to pull the car over. Some sort of threat would be considered words that are part of a punishment style system. I would also include shaming. Again, you can use words or a look or excluding a child, like putting a child in timeout. Anything that sort of feels like away from the group, your expression is not welcome here. Anything other than what I want is not welcome here. And I guess the last piece, which I think a lot of people think of when they're thinking about what's a punishment, it would be the removal of treats, removal of privileges, taking away things that the child values. So, if they're not in line with what the parent wants or expects, they know that they will have some things that they really value taken away from them. So because this is another system that involves externally motivating a child, it has the same sort of drawbacks that we see in the positive version of externally motivating a child. So there is a depreciating value of the punishments. So with a younger child, it might start off as, a really short period of time sitting in timeout does the trick to get them on board. But as they get older, sitting in timeout might be totally meaningless to them by that point. And if you want their behavior to be in line with what you want or need, as a parent, you might find that the punishments need to escalate. And I just want to say a quick side note. Of the parents that I know who have used this technique, for some of them, it's almost upset them or bothered them how it escalated. Like they never thought that they would, put a lock on their child's door to their bedroom to keep them in there as a punishment. And that, maybe doesn't sit with them so well. It's not necessarily the kind of parent they want to be, but if you find yourself using this externally motivating system, things escalate. And so I have a lot of compassion for parents who find themselves using punishment styles and then things kind of go in a direction that is not really in line with their values. I have a lot of compassion for that, and I totally understand how that would happen, because as kids get used to the punishments, their needs are still there. So they still might be valuing their needs. And if you want your needs to come out on top continuously, you're going to need to up the punishment so that you continue to get your needs met if you're using this system. Keep in mind, I've got another collaborative approach that I'm going to share more about very, very soon, but let me finish off the points for this punishment, externally motivating with punishment style. Just like the reward style, as a child gets older and they start to have more of their own power, and they're just better able to meet their needs using the resources that they have available to them. Again, this style becomes less effective. Parents find that they need to, if they want to continue to use this style, they really need to up the ante and have way harsher punishments because, they've got to overcome their child's, power that comes in being a teenager, or reaching that point of sort of young adulthood. So I think one of the hard parts for me in watching this, or reading about it, or talking to folks who were really, that's what they grew up with, that's what they knew of. The hard part for me is recognizing that as a child becomes a tween, a teen, and they start to have some of their own power, to switch the dynamic, some kids feel like they need to rebel. And that can be so hard on the parents who might have really great intentions, and these punishments aren't working, and the child is rebelling in their mind. And then the opposite also isn't very great. Like if a child isn't pushing it outwards, they often end up internalizing it. And internalizing it can be being really hard on themselves, feeling depressed, beating themselves up internally, like their internal voice is sort of taking on some of that shaming, or taking on some of those negative words, that self-judgment. So this one, as you can tell, is not my favorite. It's one that I, as a parent, really, really, really try my best to stay away from, just because the drawbacks are so much more significant. I think the biggest piece for me, again, I really value connection. I think our world, the more connected we are, the more capable we are of connecting with one another. I think that's how we find ways to understand everyone's perspective and, reach creative solutions that meet everyone's needs. So for me, connection is really at the core of humanity. And this particular style, the style of punishment associated with not doing what the parent wants, it creates the most disconnection. So it's disconnection in the sense that the parent has no idea really of what the child's needs are. The child might know what their needs are, or they might be sort of living fearfully and be unaware of their needs. But there's very, very little understanding of each other's needs. Like, it's really just based on avoiding negative experiences. And there's not a lot of connection that can happen in a space where you're avoiding negative experiences. People end up feeling protective, right? If they feel like they're going to experience something negative, then they end up protecting themselves. So the disconnection in this style of motivating a child is really, for me, it seems undesirable. So I have shared a little bit about 2 external motivators: reward, punishment, stick and carrot. And now I want to move into a more power with approach, a collaborative approach. So out of the 3 options that I'm sharing, this approach offers the most opportunity for connection. It offers the child the chance to connect with themselves. What are they feeling? What's their body indicating that they're needing? And it also helps the parent to get clear on not just what their needs are, but it offers an opportunity to understand what their child's needs are. So it's really sort of this understanding of everyone's needs matter. I'll explain a little bit more about that in a few minutes, but one of the things that I love most about this approach, because it's really about connection and it's a power with approach, it can be used at any age. So I've used this approach with my own kids and with other children that I've worked with through my self-directed education programming. And I've used this with kids who are toddler And I often share in the parenting course that I run, Connected Parenting, like these collaborative skills are really just ways to collaborate with other humans. It can be used at any age. So it's not like you have to transition out of this style or up your ante like you needed to with rewards or with punishments. Once you sort of get your head around what a collaborative approach is, things are good to go. You're fine. You can move through life using a collaborative approach in any environment at any age. And yeah, I think that's one of my favorite parts about it. Now, the flip side of that is, I think out of the 3 approaches that I'm sharing, this approach is probably the most time consuming. And it's time consuming up front. I think it's more time consuming for 2 reasons. First of all, a lot of us parents, we have existed in a world that is not as collaborative as maybe my ideal. So we might not have these collaborative skills ourselves. And I think that takes a lot of time to learn and develop in ourselves. It's a new skill set. Once you have it, it feels amazing to be able to access it, but it does take some time for us, the adults, to make the shift. The other thing that takes time is this collaborative approach. Sometimes it needs to involve a conversation. So I can totally understand the parents who are, whip out the reward, whip out the punishment, you just do what you're told, and, we move on with life quickly. This one takes a little bit more time. You're trying to explore everyone's needs. It's lots of conversation. So that's probably a stroke against this option. However, I'm going to go on and share some more reasons why you might want to explore it more and practice it more in your home. I think that this approach, because it invites in, it's not just an expression of your needs as a parent, it's also offering your child a chance for them to have some awareness about what their needs are and express their needs. And I think that gives them a chance to make more conscious choices, not just when they're with you, but when they're out in the world. They'll have a really strong understanding of power dynamics. They'll notice power dynamics coming up in interesting places. And they, as they're out in the world, exploring, living life, they might come home with some interesting stories about their experience of power over and how that felt. And, they might be grappling with, were there other options available to me in that moment? Or was I truly sort of stuck between these 2 decisions and neither of them felt very good? So you'll have these amazing opportunities to talk about power dynamics, to talk about what they see in the world in terms of who has the power, how they're using it, what else might be possible. So if you love having those kind of in-depth conversations with your kids, you'll love this collaborative approach. As kids become more aware of power dynamics in their own experience, they'll start to look around the world and the experiences of their friends and family members, and they'll start to notice how power plays out in other relationships. And I've found that kids who have this deep sense of awareness and have some skills in collaborative approaches, they are more likely to stand up for the rights of others. And I love that. If they see something and in their mind, that doesn't sit well with me. I don't like the way that person is being treated. Being able to offer support in some way, in a collaborative way. That's a really strong leadership skill that we're developing there. So although this skill is really valued, especially like in entrepreneurial environments, I'm just thinking pretty much everywhere you go, having that collaborative approach, a collaborative skill set, can be really valuable. However, for kids, it's really tricky for them to develop this skill set in the world that we've created right now. Most children experience power over in their relationships from the ages of infancy until like tween teen. And so that's a long period of time to be getting power over messaging. So if we want our kids to develop this super valuable collaborative style of, problem solving, coming up with creative solutions, I think it's super valuable for us as parents to offer them opportunities to practice collaborative approaches at home. So they don't get many chances to develop the skills, and they also don't get as many chances to practice outside of the home. So if they're going to learn some of this collaborative approach, really doing it at home with us is such a rich opportunity for them to develop that self-awareness, develop that compassion, and practice those skills that are so important for creative problem solving and connecting and collaborating with others. So we've taken a look at all three options, and there's just a little bit that I want to highlight before we move on. And there's sort of side points. It's kind of a comparison between power with approach, that collaborative approach that I just shared, versus power over, which is the two approaches of reward and punishment. So one of the things that I want to share is that as you add more kids into the dynamic, so an adult who has one child and now you add in a second child, maybe a third, picture a classroom with one teacher and 20 kids. As you add in more kids to that dynamic, to that mix, it really becomes a lot more challenging to maintain that extrinsic motivation for everyone. There's different kids, different personalities, different things that motivate them. And so it can become really complex as you add in all of these different personalities and these different responses. So the motivators, they create this complexity because all of these kids have different things that will motivate them. In addition, it can create this window for manipulation. I don't even like the way that sounds. Part of me wants to rephrase that, but for the sake of brevity, I'm just going to stick with that. So remember, this model is extrinsic. So morality, it's not necessarily part of it. And it's not as important as meeting the adult needs. The reward is usually meeting the adult needs. So if the adult has a need for morality, maybe that would be worked into the punishment or reward system, but it's still an extrinsic system. So it's not the child's morality, it's the adult's morality. Hopefully I explained that in a way that makes sense. The child, instead of being aware of, their understanding or what they want to value, it's sort of more of an A equals B. This is what I want, and this is what I have to do. And so they just don't have that same opportunity to develop their morality. And this kind of drifts into my second point, and that is, again, with an externally motivated option like rewards or punishments, you don't get to have that connection to self. It doesn't get a chance. We don't give opportunity for kids to really nurture that and develop that. And that developing a connection to self, it's not like we don't need it. As adults, we certainly need it, and as kids, it's beneficial for us to have it. But if, while it is totally possible for our kids to be, in line, reward and punishment, that can totally work. But by the time they are adults, they're either looking for opportunities for someone else to guide them with reward and punishment. Or if they're not, and they haven't developed that sense of self, and they're trying to develop or explore their sense of self in adulthood, the natural consequences that come from experimenting and discovering who you are, they're more harsh as an adult. All right, we have looked at all three options in a lot of detail. Now let's go into a little bit more detail about this collaborative approach. I really appreciate a collaborative approach. I've shared my reasons why. But how do we shift? Especially if we're so used to power over approaches ourselves, how do we shift to a power with? How do we do it? It takes a lot of time, actually. This is not an approach that will feel like a checklist of things that you can do. It's a mind shift. And I have a whole 8-week course where we work towards this mind shift, an hour and a half for 8 weeks. And it sounds like a lot, but the shift is possible. It does happen. And I think the coolest thing about the shift is that it happens in you. You're the one who feels relief. You're the one who starts to feel like you have more access to strategies. Like you're the biggest beneficiary of a collaborative approach. You might think that you're doing it for your kids, but in the end, you're going to be the one who experiences the most benefit from making this shift. So what is this shift that we experience in our 8 weeks together in connected parenting, or if you're doing it on your own? I use a ton of nonviolent communication. I've found it to be really inspiring. It's helped me to understand the dynamics of power with, and I'm going to share a little bit of that with you now so that even if you don't take my course, you can go off in the world and explore this topic on your own if that's helpful. So I think that if I were to try to sum up some of the main points of the shift that happens, I think one of the biggest points is maybe recognizing that our children deserve respect and care, and that their needs are no more or less valuable than our needs or anybody else's. We're all a bunch of humans sharing space on this planet together, and all of our needs matter. It's probably the biggest shift that happens if you're adopting a collaborative approach. And I think for parents, the tricky part about this is that we need to make the shift so that it's not just our kids' needs matter in sentiment, but also in action. So for example, some parents might know how to give their child empathy and then still do a power over approach in the end. And that can feel, that's really disconnecting. And it can even feel manipulative. And it's not just like, oh, this gets so complicated. The whole course is running through my mind right now as I try to think about how to explain the difference between, but I guess it's your motivation. So if you are using empathy as another tool for power over, oof, yeah, that gives me the heebie-jeebies. That makes my skin crawl. That's really uncomfortable for me. Now, if you are looking to do a more collaborative approach and make that shift, I want to share a little bit about what the collaborative approach looks like. So, with a collaborative approach, you're expressing your needs separate from the strategy you think would meet your needs. So quite often when we are talking with people, we've got a strategy in mind and that's what we're sharing, and we're actually unaware of our needs. I'm suggesting that you take a moment to slow down and get some awareness about what your needs are. And you may have a strategy in mind that you think might meet your needs. And instead of power over putting that strategy on your child, you instead request that strategy. And in making a request, you're having a lot of space, you're creating a lot of space for them to say no, and you're accepting their no with grace and curiosity. And you're also opening the door to understand their needs. So in their no, are there some of their needs that they want to value instead? Because keep in mind, when someone is expressing a no, it's because there's something else that they really want to value. That's why you're getting a no, because there's something else that's really important to them that they would love to also be valued. So receiving a no, it's you've created space for their needs to matter also. And you've also created space for them to have awareness about what their needs might be. And sometimes kids might say no and then need to really slow down. And when I say kids, I mean all human beings. They might really need to slow down. They might feel a no, but not quite understand where it's coming from. So you're also creating space for them to have some connection to where their no is coming from, what needs are important to them that they really want to value. So you're inviting them in. You're inviting them into the process. You're sharing what your needs are, and you're sharing what strategy you think might work to meet your needs. Then you're asking them, does this meet your needs? They get to check in with themselves. Does this meet my needs? Yes? Okay, great. Away we go. No? Here's why. Then your strategy, you're open to having your strategy shift to include their needs, to value their needs also. So that openness and not being stuck on a strategy is a huge part of this power with collaborative process. There's so much more that I could go into here, but I'm going to hold back. So the main thing is creating space for all needs to matter. And just because our kids are younger doesn't mean that their needs matter less. Inviting them into this process invites them in to connect with their own needs, have their needs matter in their family, and have them understand your needs and check in to, it feels really good to meet other people's needs too, right? Like, we're leaning into that common human trait of, we're meant to be in groups, we're meant to be in families and groups and communities, and we're leaning into that in a way that really fosters connection and creative problem solving when you bump up against a mismatch or a seemingly non-alignment in needs or values. All right, so aside from the fact that it takes a while for us as parents to make the shift in us, I think another reason why parents are sometimes hesitant to incorporate a more collaborative approach is that they're worried that collaborative approaches are being permissive. And it couldn't be further from the truth. In a permissive approach, it's either not caring about everyone's needs, you're totally on your own, or it's allowing, and I think this is what parents are worried about, it's allowing the child's needs to be centered. And that's not helpful either, and it's not a collaborative approach. Collaborative approach is everyone's needs mattering. Parents' needs, child's needs, other people who might be involved, environment. It truly is like considering all of the needs that might be alive in that moment, and not raising up any one set of needs. So that permissive approach, when I think of more permissive styles, it's almost like a total flip. So where power over, it was parents with power over, I think the permissive style is flipped where it's kid power over. But again, the kid doesn't really ever get to develop that sense of connection with other people, and doesn't really ever get to develop or understand how they're interconnected in the world. They think that their needs are more important than other people's, and that's not really helpful either, right? That's not what we're going for. Collaborative approach is everyone's needs mattering. Parents' needs, child's needs, everyone's needs. And not just necessarily human needs either. Anyway, that's a whole other topic. So this idea that everyone's needs matter, for me, like, how do you get there? How do you get this collaborative approach? First of all, it's about self-awareness and connection. Starting with yourself. Once you get clear on that, then you can branch out and understand the other person's needs, and communicating back and forth about what you're feeling, what you're needing, what the other person is feeling and needing. So there's communication skills in there. And then in that space between us, that's where it's ripe for creativity. That's where it's ripe for creativity, so that we can tap into new ways of meeting our needs. And again, everyone's needs are mattering. So that connection and awareness and communication, that really comes first so that you can get to that collaborative space. So those are the things to practice: self-awareness, self-connection, communicating. And then once you're getting good at that, you'll start to notice that the collaborative conversations happen more easily, more often. So I'm kind of winding up now. And I just want to take a moment. In some ways, this sharing in this way feels uncomfortable for me, because I actually have a lot of compassion for the parents who are, like, wishing that they could be doing something different and just don't know how, or feel like they don't have time, or, it's so tough to be a parent. And I guess right now I want to speak to those folks who have heard about collaborative approaches, want to be doing power with, really value it, and for whatever reason, it feels out of reach. And in this in this space, I'm actually including, like, myself and other parents who have really practiced collaborative approaches, use it in our homes all the time, but then even still sometimes, we live in a culture that's really power over and has some really painful constraints. And so even if we have collaborative skills, power with skills, we still might find ourselves in situations where, I'm going to end up doing a reward or punishment because that's what I kind of have access to right now. I can't access the other stuff. And so I want to make sure that I end this little chat by sharing how much compassion I have, recognizing how hard it is to be a parent, how we may really value collaborative approaches. We may practice them a ton, and there are still those times in reality where you might dip into an external motivator, because in that moment, maybe there's something else that you wish to value. Maybe you're wishing to value it, and it really is with good intentions for everyone involved. So I'm not trying to say that this collaborative approach is, the be-all and end-all, and you're a bad parent if you're not using it. I'm not saying that at all. I'm actually saying this is why I really value it. It's why I hope other people value it. And I also recognize the complexity of the world and what we're all out there trying to do. We're all out there, and we have the same needs and wishes for our kids. So, I don't want anyone to feel isolated or misunderstood. I recognize that we're all out there doing the best we can. So, yeah. I hear you, I see you, and I am one of you. I know in my family I really value collaborative approach, but there are times where, an external motivator is just what I'm going to choose right now because I don't have the capacity for a collaborative approach. So that's reality sometimes, right? Okay, well, thank you so much for watching. I hope that this was helpful. It was probably one of the longer videos that I've had to share. If you have any questions, please send them my way. And thanks for watching.